Truly, it's a love-hate relationship. The first time that I heard the word Latinx or Latine, it gave me such hope, especially as a trans and non-binary person. It allowed me to be and see that I could be exactly who I was in a culture that is so gendered, in a language that is so gendered. And then on the other side of it, on the opposite side of my love relationship, is that it's hard to use a term that is for people who look like me and you, right? Who are light-skinned in the United States. And the histories and the ugly origin of the term Latinx was actually created by a French person to other people who were not Anglo-Saxon white. And what that did was created colorism within our own community.
Welcome to Latinx in Power, a podcast hosted by Thaisa Fernandes.
Welcome to Latinx in Power, a podcast with the goal of helping to demystify tech. The way we do that is by interviewing Latinx leaders all over the world to hear their perspective and insights. Today, we are talking with Adi Mendiola Barreto. Adi's pronouns are they, them. They are second-generation Mexican and Puerto Rican, non-binary and trans. Adi is also a speaker, consultant, and activist. They received their BA in Public Relations with a minor in LGBTQ studies. After living in both coasts, they are back home in Chicago. Welcome, Adi.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
In this episode, we will be talking more about Adi's journey and the core of the work, which is helping people align their intentions with their impact in the world. I'm super excited about it. So first things first, Adi and I talked about the importance of having inclusive language and how challenging this is for romantic language like Portuguese and Spanish, and also how the language needs to change. So I'm curious to know how you feel about the word Latinx.
Well, truly, it's a love-hate relationship. The first time that I heard the word Latinx or Latine, it gave me such hope, especially as a trans and non-binary person. It allowed me to be and see that I could be exactly who I was in a culture that is so gendered, in a language that is so gendered. And then on the other side of it, on the opposite side of my love relationship, is that it's hard to use a term that is for people who look like me and you, right? Who are light-skinned in the United States. And the histories and the ugly origin of the term Latinx was actually created by a French person to other people who were not Anglo-Saxon white. And what that did was created colorism within our own community, Latinx or Latinx people here in the United States, where people with light skin or white Latinos were pushed to the front of careers, industries, entertainment, etc. And so I have many Afro-Latino friends and people that I have listened to for years telling us that this term has never included them and has actually completely ostracized many Black and Indigenous Latinx or Latinx people here in the United States. And so I think for me, the love part of it is so much about my gender, and the hate part of it is so closely related to race relations, not only here in the United States, but also in my home countries.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm always so interested about all those discussions about the word Latinx. For me, I think I heard about this word not a long time ago, maybe, but it was when I was living in the United States already. And I was like, oh, cool, that's really cool. The language needs to evolve and needs to change. And at the same time, talking with my friends in Brazil, and because now people are starting to talk about inclusive language there and all the challenges of our romantic language, and people don't even know how to pronounce Latinx. So when people want to talk about my podcast, they don't know how to say it. So I was helping my mom how to say it. But I'm so glad you brought those other points that I think it's so important. We need to be talking and discussing about it.
Yeah, the gender neutral part of the X or the E, right? Because in Spanish, X is not X in the way that we say it in English. And so I've adapted to even Latine and have Spanish speakers be included in that. And for the gender inclusivity piece to be brought out. But the term, even in general, has so much history that a lot of people who use it even might not know where it comes from. So it's truly a love-hate relationship for me.
And what does it mean to be a Latinx for you?
You know, I actually have not, for the past couple of, actually now almost a year, I've started to not use it as much for myself in particular, but it does, when I think about it as a political label or like a coalition even, like there's still, it's useful because we don't have the language to describe people of different ethnicities who are light complected, who are, or distant ethnicities who are dark complected, et cetera, and the nuances that is in community. And so for me, so much of my Latinidad is actually mostly related to my culture, right? And how I view culture. And I've been trying to even decouple them, right? Because dance for me, you know, my dad is Puerto Rican and my mom is Mexican, have different aspects of their culture that has been blended into dance and music and food for me. And so as much as I'm realizing that I fully want to claim that I'm Latinx, I would much rather be specific and say that instead of that I'm Latinx, that I'm actually second generation Mexican and Puerto Rican. And then we get to see the nuances of every individual person's culture, experience, livelihood in the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was reading an article not a long time ago that was describing this shift of like people not saying anymore they are Latinx, but saying the country they are from, descendant from. And it's really interesting, all this shift. And I can totally relate to that and feel the importance of like sometimes saying the country or the countries you are from. But at the same time, speaking about myself, when I moved to the US 7 years ago, seeing other Latinx was super important because it was the first time that I felt that I belong, you know, because at the time I was building my career here. So I was feeling really lonely and lost. And I could see a lot of things I couldn't relate to the folks that was working. So it was really important to me to be part of the Latinx community because I felt so close.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's something in a country of white supremacy, in a country that prioritizes white Anglo-Saxon people as the most valuable and highlights their experience in media and food and the way that the buildings are built and designed, our textbooks, etc. It can be incredibly isolating here. And so thirsty, desperate for culture that is ours, right? We cling so desperately. We find such home in the term Latine or Latinx. And it's almost like the term is exactly doing its job, right? Which is the original to group people of over 400 different types of languages and 30 plus countries into one label for us to find belonging. And then, right, some of the other pieces of it is how much of those stories and narratives then get washed away, right? Because we don't get to be nuanced. We don't get to say Portuguese or Spanish. We're just Latinos, you know, we're people from Latin America. And so that are now in the United States. And so I think it's important, right? And that's a part of the reason why I said it's still good for coalition community building. It's still good for that. And for me, so much about my identity is right? I get to say, yes, I got to find a home in the word Latinx. And like most things that I love and care about and have helped me, I invest back in to question, to ask, does this need to change? Does this need to grow? Does this need to evolve? And the answer is yes.
Yes, we have a lot. Public speaking is the worst nightmare of many Latinx friends, including myself. How was your process getting to public speaking?
It was first not my decision. I too was terrified getting in front of a group of people and communicating. And I was actually pushed by a teacher in high school, and I didn't have much choice. I was a little bit of a bad kid then, and I had gotten some bad grades. I didn't turn in assignments. And he said, actually, if you don't join the speech team, I'm going to flunk you. I will have to tell your parents about all of what you're up to. And so I joined the speech team, and in doing that, there were many things that I had to train, right? Like some of my nerves going onto stage and how I managed that. I knew that I couldn't eat before I was going to public speak because, oh my goodness, it was going to come out. I also knew that my hands would get really cold and clammy. And so it was best for me to always have tea, not coffee, before I was doing any type of public speaking engagements. But some of the other pieces that I think later impacted me as a speaker was thinking about how my accent growing up as a kid wasn't good enough to be competitively public speaking. And so I had to go through trainings where I would lose parts of my accents on different words, the enunciation, there was a lot of focus. And so for me, a lot of what you hear has been incredibly whitewashed and washed and, as I grew up in the United States. And so I have found my way back to my voice in a nice way over the years. I've been public speaking for almost 15 years now. And so much of me finding my voice was saying my name how it was supposed to be said, Adi Mendiola Barreto, right? And owning that there is going to be multiple ways to refer to me, yes, in English, but also in Spanish, and some of the nuances there. And bringing that into my work felt incredibly empowering after having so much of it had to be stripped away in order for me to be hireable. And so I think coming out of tech really gave me an idea as to who are the people that want to hear me speak unfiltered, who are the people that are willing to value my voice, my experience, my opinions without asking me to dim down the parts that do not fit into their narrative of what being American or living in the United States might be. So it's been quite a journey and it has taken a lot of time, but it is something now that I love so much because it gets to be all of me and not just parts of me.
That's really cool. And I really like that you first mentioned the self-awareness work that you did. First, paying attention on how your body felt when you did any public speaking and how you could deal with that. What are the tools and things you can do to minimize that or help you to feel more comfortable? You mentioned the tea and your hands, so that's really, really cool. Also, the second part of understanding how the way you used to speak was whitewashed and reclaiming that, doing this process, and also finding places you wanted to speak, you felt more comfortable and you could be yourself. That's really, really amazing. And I feel that maybe two things for other Latinx, but I think immigrants in general, folks with English as a second language, I think the accent, it's a huge part for us that sometimes it's just a blocker, but a lot of the times it's just finding your place, finding your audience, and also doing this process of feeling good about yourself and understanding that everyone has an accent.
Exactly. There's, especially in the United States, there's so much shame or I remember I went to an all-white high school and it was very jarring for my system after being in predominantly around Latinos, around Black folks, around Filipinos, around all different types of people except white people. And so when I went to high school, I remember feeling shame that I spoke Spanish. I remember feeling embarrassed that I couldn't pronounce things or that there were even American idioms because my grandmother, who is from Mexico, lived in our house growing up. And so I didn't get all the American idioms or some of the jokes that were happening. And I remember the shame that I felt too around how I spoke, how I sounded, and what that meant about my value. And so much of, the self-awareness piece, is so deeply connected. Yes, just as much as it was physical, understanding my surroundings and being able to see myself apart from my surroundings was also huge.
Really cool. And you made a video on Instagram about why you identify as white and how people don't see you as white when they know you are a Latinx. You said that they label us to keep track of us. Can you talk more about it? And personally, this was something that I felt after I moved to the US. So I'm a light-skinned Latina, and I understand all the privileges that I have because of the color of my skin. People read me as white, but when I moved here, they don't see me as white.
Yeah. I mean, that was a good way to start, you know, in my home countries. And anytime that I've gone to Puerto Rico, anytime that I've gone to Mexico, even in groups of elders, my indigenous elders, yeah, they're still calling me Blanquite. And so I'm mixed. I have a lot of different types of ancestry, especially because Chinese servants were indentured in Puerto Rico. And so I have Asian ancestry, I have African ancestry, I have indigenous ancestry, and I have European ancestry. And so I made this video because I was hearing a lot of other Latinos or Latinx people who look like me and you calling themselves brown and saying and using their Latinidad as a defense, as a shield for their own anti-indigeneity, anti-Blackness, racism, xenophobia. And so the inspiration for this video was truly to level set about the reality of race and the constructs of the labels like Latinx that is in today's society in the United States. The term was originally created for the census. And as you know, the census is to see how well settler colonialism is doing, right? Which is the replacing of the original people here with a new set of people and governing, right? Something very similar is happening in Palestine and Israel. And so that is what happened here in the United States. And so what happens when we start using terms or identities without the historical context of where they came from or their original purpose, we can do a lot of harm in community. I made that video to say, like, you think that because you were born in the United States and white people have seen you as white Anglo people here have seen you as brown, that all of a sudden you are brown. But the reality is, if you plop back in your home country, you are not brown. And so there seems to be this demonizing of only the English, of only British people who then came to what is now known the United States of America, but seem to have amnesia when they think about Europe, the other parts, the Portuguese and the Spaniards colonizing Latin America. And as if, you know, even mestizaje was not a construct of the very same thing, that we are all one race, we are all blended, as if racism doesn't exist in Mexico or Puerto Rico or Brazil or Peru. And so I made that to level set with the generations of immigrants, of Latinos, of second gen, first gen, who believe, because they have never been to their home countries, to know that they are white there, that they are the Spanish there, that they are the Portuguese there, to level set and say, actually, you know, your skin doesn't change. Like, let's put a brown crayon next to you. Like, you aren't brown. And when we talk about racial inequity in the United States, and a Black person, an indigenous person, a dark-skinned person is saying their experience, this is not the time for you to say how you've been discriminated against because of your last name. This is not the time to say, what about me too? I use a framing pretty often in my work, which is like at the ER, at the emergency room, the doctor, when they get a bunch of patients, right, they prioritize based on who is hurting the most, and they direct all of their resource. So if you have one person, for example, with a sprained wrist and another person bleeding out, the doctor is, of course, going to choose the person that's bleeding out. In the context of conversations about race in the United States, I often would hear Latinos, Latinx people complaining about their experience, saying, in this scenario, they're the people with the sprained wrist, right? Saying, well, I need service too. I need help too. Not realizing that Afro-Latinos, indigenous people, right, are not only losing their land like they are in the Amazon and all parts in Central and South America, that we should actually be organizing for a community who is suffering the most, in the same way that if a doctor were to ask you, hey, I've got some person bleeding out, do you mind waiting a little while we help this person? Of course you would say yes, of course. And so I really made that video to level set with other Latinas and say, right, in the conversations and the uprisings of Black Lives Matter, in the conversations and uprisings, racial uprisings that are happening in the United States, it is not your time to be talking about your experience of discrimination. And also, we sound foolish when we say that we are having an of color experience, because we're still alive to talk about it. Where the people who are having an of color experience are not. They do not have the access and privilege that we do. And so I want us to get out of the idea that white means only the British or European, like white equals European European, which equals white equals British. Like we can talk about the people who live in Spain and Portugal. They often look like you and I. And so that there's more nuance to all of the conversations that we are having and making sure that we're doing so with integrity and really with thinking about community more.
And how we can honor our ancestors?
Yeah, I mean, I get this question a lot because I think there's an assumption that when I say that I'm white Latine or white mixed, I'm a white mixed person, people get really upset with me. They say, how are you just going to erase all of your ancestors? You're doing them such a disservice. You're just taking away all of it. And I'm not. The truth is that I'm not. And I think that comes with the confusion that white is an exclusive term to white Americans, white Anglo-Saxon people that live here on Turtle Island. And for me, so much of that is disjointed. It doesn't have a direct connection to how we think about honoring our ancestors. There is no way that if I think about the indigenous women that are in my lineage, if I started calling myself an indigenous person, they would be very quick to tell me that I am not. The best way that I can honor any of my mixed ancestry is to not claim that I am living a life that I am not living. And so there are ways that I honor them, that one being a particular and honestly my favorite way. But there are many other ways in terms of tradition and culture, things that I have learned have been passed down to me, whether it's, my grandmother's tés and herbal remedies coming out, and maybe not necessarily for me going to prescription medicine if I have a headache, but going to ruda and really being able to have access, or not only, well, one, it's a privilege to have access for those remedies or parts of my culture to be passed down, but also to mainly just not claim a life that I am not living. They would absolutely call me, Americana, Americano, and that's the reality of my world. But the best thing that I think I could do for them is keep what access to culture I have alive.
I love your answer. Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about that a lot. Thank you for that. You are super vocal in your social media channels, which I love. You talk about trans allyship, sharing ways we can better support trans colleagues and friends. And what does it mean to be part of the LGBTQ community as a Latinx?
Oh, it means a lot of contradictions. Being Latinx, Latine, and trans has been the biggest contradiction of my life, mainly because for so long I felt as though I couldn't be, right? Growing up with my grandmother living in my house and, my parents or both my grandparents and having 3 older brothers, I was assumed to be a mother. I was assumed to aspire to be a wife. And so I remember on my 10th birthday, my abuelita was like, I said, ooh, double digits. And she told me, she was like, this is actually means that you could go cook on the stove. You can play with fire. Congratulations. And so I did, right? And I alongside her, learning her recipes and cooking. And that had shifted even my relationship with cooking. There are many people who have dated me I have never made a meal for as a result, right? Because so much of my value was placed on not me going to college, not me getting a job and financial security or being successful. It was, how do you make yourself be the most feminine, the Sofia Vergara, if you will, right? To aspire to get a man, to aspire to have a family, to have all of these things that were so wrapped up in the narrative of being a woman and a Latina woman in particular, right? Culturally. And so coming out as first bisexual and then later trans was a really big upset to that expectation, that assumption for me. And so, you can layer on the complications of religion, right? My Mexican side of my family is Jehovah's Witness. And a lot of that was, a part of assimilating here in the United States, as part of having access to community here where people weren't discriminatory to my family. And so it's again where I have to hold nuance, right? I have to hold nuance that my queerness was demonized and that the religion that demonized my queerness and my sexuality also gave my family belonging. I have to hold the nuance that my culture was so predicated machista ideals, right? That made me feel invaluable when I came out and made me feel as though that I was kind of the black sheep in my family. And at the same time, there is so much about other parts of my culture, like dancing, that I absolutely love that I wouldn't trade for the end of the world. And as much as I love dancing, then I have to listen to some of the lyrics of the songs that I'm dancing to, and maybe even I'm like, oh, this is so terrible, but the beat is good. And again, then I'm operating from scarcity because I want to dance to the music, but the music is machista. And then I'm like, oh, and I get into this almost rabbit hole. And so I'm so deeply committed to creating a culture in my life that honors all of me, that honors who I am, all of my queerness, all of my transness, remembering and actually using that as a way to honor my ancestors, knowing that homophobia and transphobia are actually European ideals. There were queens in Africa who would have people call themselves kings. She would be called the king, and she would have an entire row of men in dresses. And that was like a normal thing in society. But at the same time, in Spain and in Britain, people were being executed for being homosexual. And so that contradiction, that history lives in me. All of those pieces that like my indigenous ancestors from Mexico did not have and did not speak a language that was gendered. They didn't care and think about gender in that way. In fact, they didn't assign gender when people were born. They just let them be, and people had mixed energy, and it was very normal. And so a part of my identity is absolutely reclaiming my own history in this and understanding that I'm not new to the world, but language and talking about me might be, and that is by design, that is on purpose. And so I use that as a kind of reminder, right, from not only myself to give myself inspiration, aspiration, courage, and will to do the work that I do for trans inclusion, for tech companies, to make sure that they have safer environments. It's necessary for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really challenging to live in this world that there's this duality in a lot of areas. And it's challenging because a lot of times one thing is not 100% bad, but it's also not 100% good. So you need to pick and choose sometimes and trying to change as we go. I'm just curious if you have any resource you would like to share with us, or any tool that help you to navigate better in those scenarios.
Yes, my Instagram is filled with some different resources around pronouns. I will often share about my own experiences, or there are some trans-led organizations that also do like Ask Me Anything. So if you are wanting to learn more, but you don't want to ask a trans person and you've already researched on Google, then there's trans people who have literally made that their job, myself included, right? So I have anything from like coaching sessions if people are either curious or want to talk more about their own gender or sexuality. We can do that and find language for it. And it's not just LGBTQ people, right? The work is for everybody. And I think the best resource or the best piece of advice that I can give somebody who's interested in making sure that the world is a more expansive place is to look inward. And, you know, somebody the other day was like, oh, what you're asking for is for people to have like an existential crisis around gender. And I was like, yes, because gender is the root, is how the world is categorized, especially here in the United States, but really everywhere. And so I think that having allies who are interested in committing themselves to making sure that they support LGBTQ people, the first thing that they can do is look inside. How much of the harmful ideology am I perpetuating out? How much am I expecting myself, or even my internalized, somebody has forced me to be ultra feminine. Someone has forced me to have long hair or do have this because that's what being beautiful means. And so to get really curious, like the other day I asked actually my mother, I said, who would you be without your gender? Are you still the same person? If I just took the fact that you were a woman away, what would you have done differently? Who would you be? Would you like the same things? And I ask that because it can be an incredibly liberating question to give yourself permission to think outside of what has been expected of you, who you have been told you are, opposed to who you actually are.
Yeah, I love this question. And also, I think it's interesting for folks to understand what does it mean to be an ally, not just changing your profile picture. It's much more than that, including talking with a friend that says some stupid things or paying attention on who you vote and what you write on social media channels. But a lot of our relations with people and family members, and it's not easy, and it's not meant to be easy. It's hard, but we need to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something that I saw the other day and I almost sent it to a friend because I think there's a wrong assumption even in the way that we think about like something like romantic partners. Family, you don't choose your family, but you do choose your friends and you do choose the people that you date and the people that you spend your life with or are in romantic intimacy with. And some people are like actively choosing relationships with people's who have vastly different ideals than them, who are homophobic, who are transphobic. And those people who are committed, I have a friend who is like, she's in her late 30s and her access to men, and because she's got a PhD, like all of this, it makes her very intimidated and intimidating to men, to cisgender heterosexual men, especially as she's Latina. And so she's like, well, I'm dating this dude and we're not getting it, but well, I'm still an ally. I'm still advocating. And we have to really ask ourselves, are the relationships that we are choosing truly from a place of connection? Or are they a place from scarcity? Are they from fear of being alone? Are they what we would be proud of, right? To say, this is my partner, even though we have completely different set of values of how we treat humans. And the reality is that when I think about allyship, I think about what you are doing with your time, energy, and resources. And that includes romantic relationships. And that includes platonic relationships. Your family, you can choose your family. That's fine. You work on them as you are in connection, as you are invested in them, because they can't change, but your friends and your partnerships can. And so I even urge people to think more critically about their allyship as it relates to their time, energy, romantic, platonic, professional energy, and their resources.
Yeah, this reminds me of another thing. I have been talking with some close friends. We don't learn the sense that we can have breakups in friendships. We don't know how to do it. We don't do it. We ghost friends or we continue to be friends, but the other person doesn't have anything that you can relate. And this is really cruel, I think, for both sides. So we have been talking about that, how we can have breakups in friendships. And I think it's so important. It's so important that we need to do that.
Totally. Well, I think it goes back to also not having the language, right? I think a lot of people are afraid of conflict because they don't know how to approach things. They don't know how to de-escalate things when things get too intense. They don't know how to assert a boundary to say, actually, I don't want to be spoken to in that way. And it's making me feel like I can't trust you and it's making me actually really upset. I'm going to go and cool off for a minute, but I will return. We don't know how to do any of those things. And so it makes breakups and it makes conflict and energy and even the term emotional labor, right? People being like, oh, I don't want to invest emotional labor into this, but you invest emotional labor into everything. If you're existing, if you are a human, you have emotions and you are doing something with them at some point. And so I do think that a lot of it is both conflict resolution skills. And I also say that as a survivor. I also say that as somebody who's experienced abuse and understanding that sometimes it is okay to not talk to somebody after they have hurt you, after they have caused detrimental, irreparable harm. And so again, the nuances, right? I can say, oh, we don't have the conflict resolution skills, knowing damn well that I have absolutely cut people off because I'm like, oh, this is so toxic. Like there is no repair here. You have always intended to want and wanted to harm me. And I recognize that, and you don't get access to me anymore. And so I think both are close to the same muscle. But I think one, when you aren't in harm's way or you aren't in really hard or difficult or toxic or violent conflict, is really what we need to get good at. Some of the conversations that have like, I think you are hilarious. I think you are so funny. And your jokes are so vile. Some of your jokes are so vile that it actually makes me question whether or not I want to spend time with you, right? And I say that from a place of love. I say that also being like, I love you and you got to stop this, right? And so I think it's more the nuanced when we love somebody and we're either afraid that it's going to escalate rejection, disappointment, some of the smaller scale emotions.
Absolutely. We need to reframe the sense that what it means to love someone, because love someone is to be there, of course, support the person, but also give feedback and talk about difficult things. And this is the only way we grow. There's no other way. And I just wanted to thank you. That was amazing. I loved our conversation, everything you talked. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, I'm really excited about this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a delight. I am excited to hear it myself.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to us. We are going to link in the description of this podcast everything Adi mentioned. And you can also check our social media channels and our blog to hear more. In your next episode that's coming soon, and we are talking about sabbatical. Thank you so much.